So the first thing we're going to need to do is just start out and generate our Android project. And we're going to make a very simple red background and put the label red on the screen so that we can tell what color we're looking at. And that's enough to get kind of a good idea of kicking off your Android project and doing some very simple basic stuff that is fundamental to all your app development. So I'm switching over to Eclipse. Hopefully everybody can see Eclipse. I've kind of got Eclipse set up as if I had just, well, I did. I just opened a new workspace. I like to keep my workspaces clean. And I just have the Java perspective open, as you can see up here in the top right. Let me quickly open up the preferences for Eclipse. And you can see that in your preferences pane, you should have this Android item in the tree on the left. So this is where you do all of that setup that we talked about. You need to point to where your SDK is located, and that'll be system dependent. When you build, you have this debug key store. All this stuff should be set up by the SDK installation into the IDE. Let's see, what are some other interesting things? Okay, on this first tab, the Android, or on the first sort of tree item here for Android, this is where you set up the different targets that you have available. Okay, it just popped into view there. I was going to hit apply to make sure that it refreshed it, but it did. It popped up. So you should see something like this if you have all of these different parts of the SDK downloaded. And I'll show you where to do that in a second in answer to that question. So I am able to build against any of these SDK versions or API levels. As you can see, the API levels have kind of increased, sort of an auto number type thing, starting with 2, which is 1.1. So I guess I haven't downloaded 1.0, but there's also a difference here. You'll see that you can build against just basically Android from anywhere from any of the SDK versions that you have installed, but there's also a Google APIs one. The difference there is that Google is going to be splitting out some more SDK elements, like for instance the maps, which is the first one that's split out into its own separate SDK, so that you can decide whether or not you want to, like if you have a map in your application, you need to use the Google APIs. If you don't, then you can just use Android, and you can maybe save a little bit of resources there. Okay, so I can choose here which one of these I'm building against, or I'm running against. I'm sorry, not building against, but running against. And that's when I run into the emulator. So I'm going to choose 1.5 and hit OK. And now, if you notice, hopefully everybody has this on their screen, there's a kind of a phone icon or a device icon, and that opens what's called the AVD Manager. And inside of here is where you do the updating of all the SDKs that you have installed, the SDK versions, and also where you set up your AVD or Android Virtual Device, which is the emulator that we've already looked at here, to be installed with the platform and API level that you want. So I have two set up here. One is simply Android 1.5, and then I have one for Android 1.6 with the Google APIs. So this is
Tony, we have a question from the audience about this.
Hi, Tony. My name is Sunny. I understand that if you have a current device, maybe it's an Android 2.0, and if you build your application with an Android, 2.1 that I downloaded recently, you're probably not going to allow your application to run on, say, an older G1 that was running on T-Mobile. So can you give us a general idea of, what was running Android in 1.1, what was running 1.5 when we develop applications, and we make that choice, what's the best way to go in terms of making sure we at least get G1 and forward?
Well, if you need to get back to, so it's a question of like sort of market penetration versus features. So do you need something from 1.6 or 2.0? If you do, if it's central to your application, then you obviously need to build for that, and then you'll just be restricted by the market at the marketplace level. So users on those devices just won't see your application, as far as I understand it. I'm not sure if there's been any changes there. That's not a choice that you make. It's just they just won't show up because it knows that you're built against that SDK level or the API level. But if you don't need those features, then compile against say 1.5 or 1.6 so that you get a better penetration.
Thank you.
Yep, it's just kind of a trade-off. So there we go. And then from this AVD manager, to answer another question that was put previously, I can check out which packages I have installed by clicking here, and this shows all of the API levels that I have installed. And if I go to available packages, I get this little drop down. It's kind of like a most Eclipse update experiences that you've probably been through, and you can choose. So here's 2.1 API level 7, which I don't have. I could go click on these fellows and then say install, and then I would have those SDK versions available locally, and that's how you do your updating. Okay, are there any questions about that? That was kind of like just an answer to a question. I wasn't planning on going through that.
There was one more question that a bunch of people have been asking, and that is when you go to download Ganymede and the Android SDK, do they install together, or do you have to do something special to get the SDK into Ganymede?
Nope, I can go through that too. So Eclipse is not going to know anything about Android. So you want to go here to help, well, I mean, the Eclipse help, and then you would want to go to install new software. And then you'll get the regular Eclipse update experience. And if you go to the Android site, the Android developer site, and go to the ADT plugin for Eclipse, you'll see over here on the left, in developer.android.com, installing and updating, and come down here to installing the ADT plugin, and there are instructions for Galileo and Ganymede. By the way, the Ganymede wasn't a requirement. It's just Ganymede or later, and I think Galileo is later. Or I mean, I know Galileo is later. That's what I have running, so it should work fine, either one. But what you need to do is copy this location field for whichever one you have installed, and then copy this into or paste this into Eclipse, where you go to add a site. Okay, I already have this location installed, but you give it the site a name, and then you put in that location, and then you'll go through OK, and kind of a walkthrough to downloading the SDK. And so you actually download the Eclipse or the Android plugin for Eclipse through the Eclipse interface.
All right, let's see some code.
Cool. All right, so here I am in Eclipse, and I have the as we kind of mentioned as a prerequisite, we have the Android SDK plugin installed. So just as I would with most any normal Java project, I'm going to create a new. Sorry, so I have my package manager over here to the side. This shows from a package level view everything that's inside of my project. So I'm going to open up this guy. You may or may not be popping it out like this from the side to kind of get more screen real estate, but if you see a tab labeled Package Explorer, that's where I'm doing all this from. I'm going to go here and right click and say New Android Project, which is a menu option that I get now that I have the plugin installed. And I get this little wizard here, and here's where I will choose the build target down here, the one I want to target. The SDK, the API level that I want to target. And I'm going to call this project Simple Flashlight. The default locations are fine. You can kind of choose wherever you want to save things, and this will show you where the project's actually going to be saved, where the code is going to be saved. But I'm going to choose 1.5 for the build target, and then I also will be able to generate some code and get me kind of kicked off without having to do as much typing. Down here in this bottom area, I can choose the application name, and I'll call that Simple Flashlight as well. Now, the package name, is important to a Java project. That's kind of how you put your particular stamp on your code so that you don't have namespace collisions. But in Android, it also, in addition to namespacing your code, and the classes that you create, it's also the unique identifier for your application on the marketplace as well. So you need to have a And no, I don't know how to look up and make sure that no one else has taken the same package name as you, but just keep it to the standard domain name or something like that, or reverse domain name, and you should probably be okay. But it is a unique identifier for your application, so also try to think ahead to, if you're going to be creating more than one application, then you need to make it unique among those applications as well. So I'm going to use the com.O'Reilly .android.flashlight package. And I'm also going to create an activity, and this is just going to save some typing, and then I'll kind of go in and show you what it is, but I'm going to start out with just the red flashlight activity. And the Min SDK version is 3. So this is where you get to choose, although so you kind of get a bound, right? So you can compile for 1.6, but say that your Min SDK version is 3. That's one thing I kind of forgot to mention. So I can say that I'm compiled against 1.5, but I'm not using anything special, so that we can go back to 4. And I'm not sure if any weirdnesses show up there. So my recommendation is to keep it on the same API level that you're building against, that your target is. So that's what it is here, the 3 and 3. So I can also choose to create a test project, which will be some test code. I'm not going to go through that right now. I'm just going to click Finish, and now Eclipse will helpfully generate some code for me. So back in the Package Explorer, I can click around in here and kind of give you an overview of what a standard Android project looks like. So we have the familiar to Java developers SRC, meaning source folder, and that has the beginning of our package chain in it, kind of grouped up for us. So com.O'Reilly.android.flashlight was the package that we made, and inside of there was that activity that I asked the generator to create, red flashlight activity. So all the source code is stored under source. I'm sure you're familiar with that convention. But there's also another source folder in Android which stores in Eclipse, which stores source, and that's called gen, and this is actually generated code. So this isn't something that you'll ever edit, but we can take a look at it as we go through and add new things to the project, because this is our old friend R that I talked about during the sort of the vocabulary and platform phase. This is where all the resources are referenced, and it's generated and maintained by the SDK, so don't edit it. Android 1.5, this is the Android jar with all the framework stuff. If we had chosen that Google one, we would see one more jar in here which has the Google specific classes. Assets, you can use that to store different things, but most of your resources go in. I'd never really used that folder. I'm not really sure why it's kind of broken out that way, but all the resources that I have are stored in this directory called res. And there you can see that we start out with 3 different types suggested by the generator. One is drawable, the other is layout, and the other is, after that, is values. So inside of drawable is where you want to store your pictures, your images that you use either for skins or to put onto the view in some way. Layout contains all of the layouts, and those are written in XML, and we're going to be looking at those in a second. And then inside of values, you can store arbitrary values, and the convention is to keep them in a file name that has some sort of meaning that tells what they are. And in this case, we have some strings. So strings are broken out into their own separate configuration sort of structure. So that way localization works, and we're going to see how that works in a second as well. So this whole packet, or this whole directory structure underneath res, now that I've shown you the conventions, it's arbitrary because all of the resources get described inside the XML, and that's how the actual structure is made up. So you can organize this to your taste if you need to sort of break up. If you've got a lot of strings in your strings file, you can start breaking those up into different files that make more sense for your layout and are a little more descriptive. But we're going to see what's inside those guys in a little bit. For right now, let's look at the manifest. So the manifest is what describes your application to Google in all of its different contexts that it needs it. So this is what the marketplace will look at when you upload your application to figure out what SDK version it's compiled against, and which SDK version it supports, and what the name of it is, and there's some permissions that you can set, like, hey, I'd like to use the user's camera. So if you've ever installed an Android application through the market and you see that, hey, just as a bit of information, if you want to make sure that you trust this application, it's going to be using your location. So if you don't want it to use your location, now is a good time to not install the application, that kind of stuff. All of that is taken care of inside the manifest. So the IDE here has given me this fancy view for editing it, but I don't really like that. So I like to go down to the tab here at the bottom and select the XML version so I can actually see the code, because that's a lot easier to look at. You know what I forgot to do, and every presenter should always do, is change the font size. So let me bump that up real quick. There, I should be able to read that a little bit better. Okay, so again, this is our manifest. This shows, as you're probably aware, what the word means. Pretty much, this is how things are set up inside of our application, and what comes along with our application. So you can see when we chose the Min SDK version, that got listed down here, and this uses SDK, and it got listed up here. Oh, well, there's another place that it can show up inside of the manifest or the application tag. I can't remember which one. Also, we can store information specific to our application. So this package structure is important, again, because it's a unique identifier. But you'll also notice that you'll see in the manifest package attribute, you see the fully qualified package name, and then down here in the activity tag underneath the application for our application, there is a activity named red flashlight activity, which we generated, and it starts with a dot. So you can probably see how that's just concatenated straight onto this package, and that tells Android what the actual class for the activity that we're talking about in this manifest file here is located. The fully qualified class name is the combination of the name and the package at the manifest level. You can also see there's the intent filter part here, which is a little bit more advanced than we need to worry about. But since it's generated, you can probably guess that this is kind of boilerplate. Basically, what this is saying here is that there's an intent filter on this activity that we generated called android.intent.action.main, and another one, or that falls under the category of android.intent.category.launcher. Basically, what that's saying is, hey, Android, when this application is launched, start this activity. So I'm just saying that this activity here is the main activity that gets run from the application's perspective. So this is what the manifest is all about, and we'll be coming back to look at this in a second. You can be sure of that. All right, so that's kind of a description of or the layout of an Android project, a standard Android project. This is how the SDK will look at things, and how the IDE will generate it for you. I can see that I've got some errors down here. Let me figure out what this is all about. It's missing a required source folder gen. Project cannot be built. So Java or Eclipse had a little bit of a problem building my completely generated application. I'm not sure what it's complaining about.
We had a couple of people online that were saying the same thing.
Really? Yeah. Great. Thanks, Eclipse. Nice work.
Well, I was going to ask you that question.
Well, I mean, I don't know how to fix that except to just, I don't know, frog some stuff around here. Close the project. I don't know. Open the project. Now refresh. Okay, so clean will sometimes fix that. So I don't know why this happened, but when you get weird project errors like this that you just don't understand why it's the case, just as if you were on a Windows machine and you would reboot to fix it, or less often on a Mac machine like I had to do at the beginning of this screencast to reboot to fix the problem, a project clean is kind of like a project reboot. So I'm going to go clean that and see how it works. That basically destroys generated stuff, and it looks like we're all green. So yeah, if anybody else is having that same problem, do a project clean, and that should fix it. And I don't know why Eclipse didn't get its act together the first time around, but there you go. Okay, let's dive into some code. Let's look at what we've already got so far with the generated code that we've got. So there's two things that I want to look at, and let me start from the most user-facing of things, and that is inside the resources, inside the layout. So what was generated here is not only an activity. We said we wanted an activity to be generated, but Eclipse also generated layout for us to use, and that was called main. So I'm going to open up the main XML layout, and it's going to open up in this sort of visual editor, which comes along with the IDE. You can do a lot of stuff in here, like dragging things out and positioning them and whatnot, and you can also simulate different devices, simulate different orientations, and all that stuff's real nice, but I find that it's still a little wonky, and as a developer I always like to see the code, so I switch over here to the actual XML. So here are some tags that you're going to run into a lot. This falls under the class of layout, and it is a linear layout. A linear layout is our first introduction to Android layouts, and basically it means lay things out in a linear fashion, and then based on this Android orientation attribute, we want to lay things out in a vertical layout, which means top to bottom. We can also use horizontal, and we'll be running into plenty more layouts in later lessons. But basically, this is saying inside of this tag, whatever you find, lay it out from top to bottom, sitting on top of each other, and it also puts a text view in there for us, which is nice of it. Although we're going to repurpose it a little bit. So if I switch back to the layout view here, you can see that's what's showing up right here. This little text view is sitting at the top. So let's do a few changes so we can kind of get an idea for how these things, these components like text views work. First of all, every Android layout element, every component, pretty much without exception has to have a layout width and a layout height. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, until you know what those are, you're just going to be boilerplating in layout width and layout height of either fill parent or wrap content. And what that means is, as you can probably guess, fill parent will stretch the component from in its dimension, and in this case width is fill parent, so that text view stretches across the whole screen. And the height is just wrap content, which means I will be laid out as big as the contents, as big as my contents, speaking from the point of view of the text view. So height is wrap content, the width is fill parent. I'm going to change that to be wrap content for both. And I'm going to come up here to the layout tag, and I'm going to say Android gravity. And when I hit control space on any of those platforms, I get some completion for us there. So I can type a little bit less. I'm going to say the Android gravity should be center. Now, when I switch back to layout mode, I can see that the text is centered in the middle of the screen. So this is, I mean, if you've ever worked with anything like HTML, it's probably fairly familiar to you, and especially if you've worked with something like Adobe's Flex, this is pretty familiar. This is kind of like an XML layout language with components and stuff like you would expect. So you're probably pretty familiar with this stuff already, even though you don't know it. And as we go through, you'll see that more and more. Okay, now another weird thing that you may have already seen in the manifest, and we're going to look into a little bit more now, is this particular syntax. The @string or the @something with a sort of a directory path type thing. So this is how, specific to strings, how Android apps are localized and internationalized. So what this is saying is get me the value of the string labeled hello and put the contents in here. So if I come back here, open up my package manager and go to resources values in the strings XML directory, or file that we looked at a second ago. If I switch over to XML view, there is a string inside of a string tag with a name of hello, and that is hello world red flash activity, or red flashlight activity, which is what we see on the screen when we go to the layout view in the main XML, hello world red flashlight activity. So you can kind of see how those values are looked up off of the resources that are set up. So what I'm going to do is change this string. I want this to just say red. So I'm going to make a string called red, and you can see over here in the left, when I saved this, I got a compilation error because it's saying that I don't know where there's a string red. I don't know of any string called red. I'm actually going to get rid of this hello. We don't need it anymore, so I'm going to name this back in the strings XML from hello to red and say red. Now we should have a label of red in the middle of our main XML, and there it is. Okay, good deal. Now the last thing we need to do for this step is to make a red background on the view for this activity. So I'm going to put a background attribute on here, and I'm going to use the resource setup. You can see I got a little bit of completion here. Control space will bring that up for you. So I can complete this with a drawable, a layout, a string, or there's other types too. So I'm going to add one called color. I want that to be color of label red. So you can see I get an error here because I don't have any such resource. So now's the time to create that. I'm going to go over here to the resources inside the values, because color is conventionally put inside the values directory, and create a new file by right-clicking and saying new. And I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call that colors.xml. And when I switch over here to the XML view, the root tag, and let me grab this sort of boilerplate XML declaration, and the root tag for all these resources are resources. Just like inside the strings, everything inside of this resources, and that is how things are organized inside of the R class, which we'll see in a second. So keep that in mind. It doesn't matter what the file name is. All that matters is that things are organized inside of the resources tag, and they have a tag that Android understands. Like for instance, since I'm inside of this resources tag, I get some completion here, and I want to choose a color. So inside of the color tag, Android will know that I'm defining a color, and I want the name to be red. And you may be used to seeing so I can define these just like I would in, say, HTML or something by going like ff0000, but I can also define an alpha on there, which I believe goes first. So I want the alpha to be FF. Now, if I'm wrong, that's going to be a really crazy looking color. But if you're not following me, basically, this is an HTML sort of hex description of the color, which means I want full value for red and no value for green and no value for blue. So that's going to be a red color. And then if I'm right and alpha goes first, this means that it's full alpha. That means it's not semi-transparent, and you can play around with that. But you also don't need to define the alpha. So maybe I'll be. No, I won't be safe. I'll try this. I'm going to stake my reputation on this. Okay, so now we have got a red background. If I switch back to main, that error went away on this layout. I've got a red background. When I look here, there it is, red. Fully alphaed, non-transparent red. So now we've got pretty much what we want to see for this first step. And without ever going into the Java code, we've just looked at a layout so far. Let's run this in our emulator and see the fruits of our labors. So I'm going to right-click Simple Flashlight here. the project in the Package Explorer, say run as Android application. And you can see down here in my console, I'm getting a bit of information. The APK is the compiled together application, the extension of the application. There we go. So that's what the compilation did. It built all the Java code and did all that stuff and compiled the resources into the right place and set up the manifest, and then it uploaded that APK to my emulator, and here we are. It's running inside of the emulator. Round of applause, please.
Yay!
Sounds like people wanted to see this code, but we have completed the first step. One thing I was talking about here is down in my console. It tells what we went through installing simple flashlight APK. So the SDK built together this APK, or APAK as I call it. It's like an Android application is compiled into this one file, and that contains the compiled Java code, and the resources are put in the right place and all that with the manifest, and that's what constitutes your Android application. So when you're testing with other people, you can get one of these APK files and ship it around and upload it to different devices with the SDK. And in any case, that's what Eclipse is doing for us here. It compiles together the APK and then uploads it to the emulator and then starts that first activity, the default activity, which everybody can see here. I think it is zipped, yeah.
Zip format?
I think it is. So you could unzip it and look around inside.
Some known structure.
Yeah, I've never actually done that. That's kind of amazing that I haven't done that, but I just okay, so some people wanted to see the code. Maybe now that I'm online, we can ask some specific questions about the code.
Yes, I actually have a question from somebody. In my resources XML files, can I define my own resource user-defined types instead of string or color, etc.?
I think not, because Android is going to set those up based on so there's a very complex way that I think you may be able to, but I'm not sure because I haven't looked into it. I don't think you can just arbitrarily do it. It's more than just putting the tag in there, because the tags are known to Android by another set of resource configuration keys that are kind of set up at the SDK level, and you may be able to make yourself. I'm just not sure. So I'm going to say 90% no. I don't think you can. But somebody may be able to prove me wrong. I'm not quite sure on that.
Okay.
Can you use Maven to develop Android apps?
You can. If you're the type of person that wants to use Maven, you can definitely use Maven. I think there's actually some cool POMs or whatever. It's been a while since I've used Maven, but I think there's some definitions for using the SDK stuff and running a test phase and all that stuff through Maven. I mean, a good use case for that may be like you wouldn't use it locally, but unless you wanted to. But then you could also have a continuous integration build that's running a test suite or something like that and posting results, so that when people check in, it'll run the Maven suite of tests, or the suite of tests that Maven knows about, and maybe even puts the APK up for somebody to download and install to a QA device. So yes, that's definitely possible.
Okay. And now there seem to be a lot of people who are having an issue with the URL dl-sslgoogle.com/android/eclipse. It says no repository found, and a lot of people said this.
Yeah, this is.
About that?
I couldn't tell you. I mean, it may be down. Maybe Google's. I mean, it doesn't seem likely, but Google could have had a hiccup there. And that's not something I don't know how to solve that unless. I mean, if they're copying it in off of Google's website, then I'm not sure what's going wrong there.
Yeah, we'll post the links and then and give it a test after class. Make sure. Okay. And a couple people asked, are the Android versions backward compatible? I'm assuming that you're not using features that are specific to 2.01. Are they backwards compatible if you make sure you choose that API level correctly?
So if you compile against 2.0 and you set the min SDK level lower than 2.0, whatever that is, like say I think 2.0 is SDK level 5, I may be wrong on that. Say you build against 2.0.
Tony,
Yes?
interrupt. Can you just show for everybody the colors.xml file instead of the backslide so that they can start correcting some of the errors they're getting?
Sure. Colors. You know what? I'll do even this. I'll be even nicer. I'm not sure who's doing what, so there's split view.
Nice.
Okay, so if you compile against 2.0 and you set the min SDK level lower, like say 2.0, if 2.0 is 5 and you set the min SDK level to 3, you'll get a warning through the compiler. So it's not actually an error, and in that case you should be fine deploying to those earlier ones. But there is a reason that there's a warning, and maybe it's just to alert you to the fact that maybe you're not getting the results you expect, or there may be some other weirdness. I don't know. I would keep those, if if you really want to target 1.1, then you should compile against 1.1.
There's a couple of comments that are possible solutions to the repository issue. One is to make sure that the Galileo repo is activated. Ubuntu's build doesn't have this in there for some reason, so it will fail. Another is to, if you see a choice to download via HTTPS, just put a check mark in that box and retry it, and it worked for another person.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, I think the last time I went through and installed this, it wasn't an HTTPS address. I don't know why they changed to that. I mean, if it's an open, maybe some user credentials or something is passed over that connection, and they wanted to keep it HTTPS. Any questions specific to that code?
Well, I have a quick question. Is XML the most efficient way of changing color rather than in the Java graphics itself?
Well, if you hard-code it in your code, then you're stuck with that. So, I mean, the nice thing about it is that you get to be more general in your naming. It's more of a design issue, I think. So I'll have a color. I probably won't have a color called red. I'll probably have a color called background, or main background or something. That's more like based on based on the needs of my application. So then I'm free to choose that, and the semantics of it are that in my code I will see main background instead of whatever the color is. So it's better from a design perspective to break out the resources into the values in a different place, and the semantic meaning is in the code. You're using your resources more semantically, and there's an extra benefit for strings where you can localize them. But yeah, for colors, there's still a good reason to break them out to colors file.